Is Mr. Macron's tenure at risk?
No, it's not at risk. I think strikes are pretty normal in France. And then we've seen the yellow vest strikes. We've seen strikes before under the Macron governance already. So it's not at risk. And Macron has delivered actually in the first couple of years, because what you just showed on the chart is the unemployment rate has started to come down. And also when you look at confidence indicators, we have seen more or less a decoupling of the French economy from the rest of the Eurozone. Because while the rest of the Eurozone is coming down, France is stable. This obviously is very tricky. This is risky, but I think it does not risk the entire Macron presidency.
Francine, let me go to you with the expertise you have on this personally, and that is, this is not the yellow vests, is it?
Well, this is not the yellow vest, but it goes to the same movement, Tom, right? So the yellow vest was, some say, a miscalculation of President Macron trying to, put the French society into a greener path by taxing fuel, which actually hurt the working class. So it goes back to a general sense of discontent with reforms, with transitioning. And I don't know whether this goes back to also a lot of the French feeling that they want the same privileges that their parents had, right? So the question for George Saravelos, looking at these pictures, is France reformable? And if not, where do we end up?
Well, I think if you look at what Macron has achieved, he actually has achieved some things. The flexibility in the labour market has been going up, and part of the reason behind this unrest is that there is reform going through in France. But I think from a market and macro perspective, a lot of the focus next year is actually not going to be in France, and it's going to be in Germany. And the political developments there, the possibility of finally providing a bit more fiscal stimulus. But that's really the key question, I would say, as opposed to France.
Carsten, how does, does Emmanuel Macron popularity ride on this? Like, he's actually done quite a lot of reforms, and he's better, he's better prepared than other presidents.
I think he has done quite reforms. We also heard the Prime Minister actually earlier this week saying he will also push through these reforms. I think the problem in France is something that we will see in the US, that we see in other Eurozone countries, which is the discrepancy between the urban areas, Paris, and the rural areas, and what you just said, because and if there is taxation, if there's discrepancy, the divergence between the ones who have, the ones who haven't, the ones who live in urban areas and the ones who live in rural areas is widening, is increasing. This leads to unrest, and it also shows how tricky it is to reform, but I think he will continue.
George, the dynamics of this is real simple. Every country for itself. There's cultural differences, there's historic differences. You mentioned Germany and the challenges next year. Is one of the prime reasons for this is they're all linked by the euro? Would you suggest there would be less cultural tension if they had the leakages of their own currency pairs?
Well, the euro is, of course, creating these tensions, for instance, around fiscal policy, where the average fiscal position in Europe is essentially too tight. But then, on the flip side of that, you have to think that the European Union provides quite a lot of positive influence, for instance, in terms of its ability to negotiate trade. And we see that with the negotiations around Brexit. Next year, a critical issue for Europe will be this question of digital taxation and how they can negotiate with the US. Indeed, Trump is threatening fresh trade sanctions if Europe goes ahead with some digital taxation on US companies, and we have the OECD proposal as well. So yes, Europe is creating issues around monetary policy and fiscal policy not being compatible, but around other issues, most notably trade, Europe is actually providing a negotiative advantage to Europeans via its size.
What does Christine Lagarde need to do for the ECB, apart from convincing Germany to spend more fiscally?
I think continue, like she did, to talk for 90% of her time about other stuff than monetary policy. So there's very little she can do on top of what she's done already. So I think she will simply be stay on put. Maybe just very quickly on this euro thing. There still is a need for France to reform its pension system, whether they have the euro or they don't have the euro. There is a big need for fiscal stimulus in Germany, whether there is a euro or there is no euro, because it's always in the domestic interest. So I think it's slightly too easy to always blame the euro for these things.